Your heartbeat keeps the night away, said the alien girl. The Empire went silent. The spaceship drifted silently through the black expanse of space, its polished hull reflecting the faint glow of distant stars. Inside, the corridors were quiet, too quiet for the comfort of some passengers. Among them, Elias, a human civilian, walked slowly down the narrow passage, his hands tucked into the pockets of his worn jacket. He had been traveling between colonies for weeks, visiting trade hubs and scientific outposts, yet this mission felt different. The ship itself was enormous, a sprawling vessel designed for the Empire, a civilization so vast that it controlled entire star systems. Humans were rare on these ships, often treated as outsiders, observers, or sometimes curiosities. Elias had grown used to the stares, the quiet suspicion, and the subtle judgments, but he had learned long ago not to let them bother him. At the far end of the passenger compartment, a small figure crouched in a corner. She was tiny, not even half the height of a human child, and yet there was something in her posture that spoke of both fear and defiance. Her skin was a pale violet, almost translucent under the ship's dim lights, and her large eyes shimmered with an intensity that made Elias pause. The child had been brought aboard under strict orders. She was a rare empathic alien, a species that the Empire feared and often imprisoned. Empaths were unpredictable, able to sense emotions, manipulate feelings, and in some rare cases, even influence the behavior of others. The Empire had strict laws regarding them, and she had been treated like an object to study rather than a living being. Elias stopped a few meters away, unsure if he should speak. The child's eyes flicked up to meet his, and for a moment he saw a mixture of panic and hope. She was trembling, and not from the cold. The fear radiating from her was almost tangible, and even though humans had faced danger for centuries, Elias felt a strange pang of empathy. "Hello," he said softly, his voice echoing slightly in the narrow corridor. He didn't want to frighten her further, but he also didn't want to step away. "I'm Elias, you don't have to be afraid." The child's lips trembled, and for a moment she seemed frozen. Then, slowly, she inched closer, her small hands clutching the edge of the wall for support. It's coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The night, it's here." Elias frowned, unsure what she meant. He had heard stories from other civilizations about strange cosmic phenomena, but nothing concrete, yet her fear seemed real, deep, and instinctive. "The night?" he asked. "What do you mean?" She shook her head quickly, eyes wide and glistening. "You don't understand. It's alive. It comes from the void. It devours everything in silence. It drives us mad." Her small body shook as she spoke, and Elias could hear the urgency in her words. Elias crouched slightly to be at her level, his eyes calm and steady. "I don't know what this night is," he admitted, "but I'll stay with you. You won't be alone." For a long moment, she simply stared at him, as if testing whether he was lying. Finally, she edged closer, placing a small hand on his sleeve. The touch was delicate, hesitant, and yet filled with a silent plea. "I need your heartbeat," she said, almost reverently. "Your heartbeat, it keeps the night away." Elias froze, caught off guard. His mind raced. How could a human heartbeat, just a simple rhythm of blood through veins, possibly have any effect on some mysterious force of darkness? Yet the intensity in her eyes left no room for doubt. She believed it, and strangely, despite every logical fiber in his mind telling him this was impossible, Elias felt the smallest flicker of hope, as if perhaps the impossible was real. He nodded slowly, more to reassure her than to agree. "Then I'll stay close," he said. "You won't have to face it alone." The child, whose name he had learned was Lyra, finally allowed herself a small sigh, though the tremor never fully left her. She moved closer still, pressing her ear lightly against his chest. Elias felt a warmth spread from her small hand, a connection that seemed almost tangible, even beyond the physical. The faint thrum of his heartbeat filled the silence around them, steady and unbroken. And for the first time in hours, perhaps days, Lyra's wide eyes softened. In the ship's control room, sensors began to register an anomaly. Crew members noted a faint ripple in the darkness surrounding the vessel, an unusual dispersion that coincided exactly with the location of the two passengers. The Empire's scientists had never seen anything like it. They scanned, analyzed, and recalculated, but the readings refused to conform to any known principle. It was as if the darkness itself recoiled from something utterly simple, a human heartbeat. Elias felt the pressure of the ship's acceleration as it entered a shadowed region of space. The lights dimmed automatically, emergency protocols engaging. Even as the ship groaned and shifted, he kept his hand near Lyra, who clung to him, whispering softly, "It won't touch me if you stay here. It won't touch me." Hours passed. Elias spoke to her in calm, steady tones, telling stories of Earth, of sunsets, and the quiet moments humans treasured. Lyra's breathing gradually slowed, though her body remained tense, ready to flee at any sign of danger. Every time she felt fear rising, she pressed herself closer to his chest, and every time she did, the readings from the darkness around the ship indicated it was weakening. The crew began to notice more unusual occurrences. Lights that had been dimmed by the darkness flickered back on without explanation. Instruments designed to measure gravitational disturbances reported inexplicable calm in areas that should have been turbulent. And always, sensors closest to Elias and Lyra registered the same anomaly, a small, steady pulse radiating warmth, energy, and an invisible force pushing back the night. By the next day, whispers among the passengers spread. Humans had never been considered a significant force in the Empire, yet here was one, not wielding weapons or machines, standing unarmed and somehow holding the shadows at bay. Lyra, small and fragile as she seemed, walked alongside Elias, occasionally glancing up at him with wide, earnest eyes. Her faith in him was unwavering. During a meal in the common area, another alien approached cautiously. It was a tall, lithe being with silver skin and sharp features, a diplomat from a conquered system. "What is happening?" it asked, voice trembling. "The night, it retreats where you walk. Who are you?" Elias shook his head. "I don't know, I'm just here." "But you are doing something it cannot resist," the diplomat whispered. "Your kind, your heartbeat, it carries something the night fears." Elias was silent, unsure how to respond. He didn't feel special. He felt ordinary, even small in the vastness of space. Yet when Lyra pressed against him, when her small hand rested on his arm, he realized that perhaps the simple act of being alive, of holding onto hope, of refusing to surrender to fear, was enough to make a difference. The days blurred together. The ship passed through regions of increasing darkness, each shadowed area more dangerous than the last. Yet as long as Elias stayed close to Lyra, as long as he spoke and shared warmth and life, the night did not consume her. The Empire's officers began to take notes, their strict protocols and rigid rules unable to account for what they were witnessing. The human, so unremarkable in every traditional sense, became the key to survival against a force no one could explain. One evening, as the ship glided through the black void of space, Lyra whispered again, her small voice trembling but firm. "Your heartbeat, it keeps me safe. It keeps the night away. Please, don't ever stop." Elias smiled, placing a hand on her tiny shoulder. "I won't. I promise." And in that moment, the galaxy seemed to pause. The Empire, with all its might and knowledge, could only watch as a human, guided by compassion and courage, held back a darkness that had terrified even the greatest civilizations. A small alien girl and a human boy, unarmed, ordinary, yet extraordinary in the simplest ways, stood together against the void. And the night, for the first time, hesitated. From that day forward, the crew began to speak quietly among themselves. Perhaps humans were not as weak or insignificant as the Empire believed. Perhaps, in their hearts and in their simple humanity, they carried a power that no machine, no weapon, and no force of darkness could ever destroy. And while the galaxy remained silent, watching, the small alien girl pressed close to the human, her eyes wide and shining, whispering softly, "Your heartbeat keeps the night away." The ship continued its journey through the dark region of space, but the shadows seemed thicker than before. The Empire's officers moved with an unusual sense of caution, their usual confidence shaken by the strange occurrences surrounding Elias and Lyra. They had expected this mission to be routine, transporting passengers, gathering supplies, and passing through the outer colonies. But instead, they found themselves facing a force they could neither understand nor control. Elias spent most of his time near Lyra. She followed him like a shadow, tiny hands often clutching the folds of his jacket. She seemed calmer than before, though her large, violet eyes never stopped scanning the corridors, as if expecting the darkness to appear at any moment. He tried to teach her simple games from Earth, counting rhythms and small stories, all meant to distract her from fear. Sometimes the girl would giggle softly, a sound so rare that it surprised him, but it faded quickly when the lights flickered or the ship creaked. The officers began noticing patterns. Wherever Elias and Lyra spent time, the night seemed to weaken. Instruments recorded anomalies that defied every known principle of physics. The readings puzzled the Empire's best scientists. Dr. Malvek, one of the senior researchers, examined the data with a frown. "It is impossible," he muttered to himself. "Nothing should affect the night, nothing, yet here we are. It is as if the darkness avoids them." He turned to another officer, a sharp-featured alien named Cyril, and said, "We need to observe this human more closely. His physiology, his presence, it is unlike anything recorded. Perhaps this is not simply chance. Perhaps it is something deeper." Cyril nodded slowly. "But how? He is ordinary, no enhancements, no known abilities, yet the readings—" "They are consistent," Malvek interrupted. "Wherever he goes, the night withdraws, and the child, the empath, she seems to react to him as though he is a shield. We cannot ignore it." Elias, unaware of the discussions behind him, continued speaking to Lyra. "Do you see that star over there?" he asked, pointing to a faint blue point of light beyond the viewing window. "That star is millions of kilometers away, and yet it shines so brightly, just like hope. Sometimes the smallest lights can be the strongest, even in darkness." Lyra tilted her head, listening intently. "Do you really think hope can stop the night?" she asked softly. Elias smiled gently. "I don't know if it can stop it completely, but it can push it back. Darkness hates life and it hates courage. You and I were alive, that matters." She pressed closer to him, letting his heartbeat fill her ears. The night outside seemed to retreat, almost imperceptibly, as if the small pulses of life inside the ship created a protective bubble around them. It was not a force they could see, touch, or manipulate, yet it was real. As the ship approached a dense asteroid field, alarms blared. The Empire's fleet had designated this sector as dangerous, a place where communication with the main command was often lost. The shadows deepened here, more intense and oppressive. Crew members hesitated, whispering among themselves. "You should remain inside the central hold," one officer said to Elias. "It is safer there." Elias shook his head. "I stay with her," he replied firmly. "Lyra needs me, I won't leave her alone." The officer glanced at Lyra, then back at Elias. Her violet eyes glimmered with silent trust, and even the hardened officer hesitated. "Very well," he said, though doubt lingered in his voice. As the ship navigated through the asteroid field, strange noises echoed in the corridors. Low hums, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, and shadows that moved with a mind of their own. Most crew members kept to well-lit areas, their fear growing with every passing moment. Yet Elias remained calm. He kept Lyra close, speaking in steady tones, telling stories of Earth, of forests and rivers, of sunlight and rain. He told her about small acts of kindness, moments when humans had risked their lives to protect one another, and even simple tales of friendship between strangers. The empathic child listened, absorbing every word, every rhythm of his heartbeat. And the night, relentless and patient for eons, seemed unable to cross the invisible barrier created by the bond between human and alien. Late in the ship's observation deck, Dr. Malvek and Cyril observed from behind reinforced glass. Malvek adjusted his instruments again and whispered, "This cannot be explained by science. Human biology, their emotions, they are affecting a cosmic entity. It should be impossible." Cyril shook his head. "Yet we witness it. Perhaps humans possess something the Empire never measured, something not found in technology or weapons." Meanwhile, Lyra's anxiety grew as the ship passed closer to an area where the darkness thickened unnaturally. She shivered and buried her face in Elia's chest. It's stronger here," she murmured. "I can feel it trying to reach me." Elias held her tighter, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. "Then we will face it together. Nothing can reach you while I am here. Your heart and mine, they are stronger than this darkness." Hours turned into days. The crew grew more reliant on Elias' presence, even though no one fully understood why. Children aboard the ship would peek into the central hold, drawn by the warmth and calm that seemed to radiate from him. Even the most hardened officers began to respect his quiet courage. He did not wield weapons, issue commands, or display authority. Instead, he simply listened, comforted, and allowed his humanity to shine, even in the face of fear. One day, a young cadet approached him cautiously. "Sir, I don't understand. How does your presence stop it? Why does the darkness recede?" Elias shook his head, smiling softly. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe it's not about fighting. Maybe the night only fears life that refuses to give up. Maybe it cannot handle someone who cares enough to face it with hope. The cadet frowned, trying to understand. So it's not strength or weapons? No, Elias replied. Sometimes the smallest things, kindness, courage, a heartbeat, can be stronger than any weapon. Lyra nodded beside him. It is true. Humans are loud in the right way. Their hearts, they shout even when they are scared. The night cannot bear it. As the ship passed through another dark sector, a sudden tremor shook the vessel. Crew members fell, alarms blared, and shadows appeared along the walls, twisting and flickering. Panic surged through the corridors, yet Elias remained calm. He moved steadily, guiding Lyra, speaking to her, letting his heartbeat be her shield. Something remarkable happened. Where he walked, the shadows seemed to part, the darkness fading slightly. Crew members who followed cautiously noticed that even in areas previously consumed by blackness, there was a small halo of light surrounding Elias and Lyra. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to give hope. For the first time, the Empire's scientists considered a possibility they had never imagined. That humans could influence cosmic forces not through technology, but through life itself. Not through conquest or control, but through courage, empathy, and the simple act of remaining alive. The night, which had seemed unstoppable, paused, observing the human and the small, empathic alien girl. It was ancient, relentless, and intelligent, yet it recoiled at the rhythm of life emanating from them. Elias, unaware of the scrutiny, continued to speak softly, telling Lyra stories of sunrises and rivers, of laughter and shared meals, of family and strangers who had chosen kindness. By the time the ship reached a sector with faint stars piercing the darkness, the crew had grown to understand a simple truth. Elias' presence was more powerful than any weapon in the Empire's arsenal. His courage, his calm, his empathy, and the small rhythms of his heartbeat created a shield, not against flesh and blood, but against the shadows that had terrified civilizations for centuries. That night, as the ship floated silently through the void, Lyra rested against Elias. "I will never forget this," she whispered. "Your heartbeat, it keeps the night away. I will remember it forever." Elias smiled, a quiet warmth spreading through him. "And I will stay with you as long as you need me. We face it together." The ship's crew, the Empire's officers, and even the scientists began to witness something extraordinary. That in the vast emptiness of space, amidst fear, darkness, and uncertainty, a human could shine brighter than any star, not because of weapons, strength, or cunning, but because of courage, empathy, and the simple refusal to give up. And in the quiet, the night retreated a little further, unable to pierce the warmth that flowed from a small human heart and the trust of a tiny alien girl who believed in him. The darkness beyond the ship had grown heavier, deeper, as if the night itself had taken notice of Elias. And Lyra, no longer a subtle threat, it pressed against the hull, shrouding the ship in black tendrils that seemed almost alive. Crew members who had once walked confidently through the corridors now moved cautiously, whispering anxiously, glancing over their shoulders. Even the Empire's most experienced officers had never seen anything like this. Elias stayed close to Lyra, who clung to him with quiet desperation, her small hands pressed against his chest, listening intently to the rhythm of his heartbeat. "It feels stronger," she whispered. "It can see us. I can feel it trying harder." Elias nodded, trying to keep his voice steady, though his own pulse had begun to quicken. "Then we will face it together," he said. "We've come this far. You and I were stronger than it knows." The night seemed to pulse in response, shadows curling and twisting around the corridors, forming shapes that were almost tangible. The ship's sensors went haywire, recording fluctuations in gravity, temperature, and electromagnetic fields that defied all known science. "Doctor." Malvek and Cyril watched from the control room, their faces pale as they tried to comprehend what was happening. "It's intelligent," Malvek muttered. "It's testing them. It knows it cannot touch the human directly, so it probes, it strikes where it can." Cyril nodded grimly. "And yet it recoils each time the human heart beats. There is a rhythm it cannot overcome." Elias had no time to consider the Empire's theories. The night was real, pressing against the ship, invading corridors, slipping into shadows, and whispering with voices that carried faint echoes of fear and despair. Every crew member felt it differently, but all agreed on one truth: it was relentless. Suddenly, an alarm blared. The ship shook violently, throwing several crew members to the floor. The hull groaned under a pressure that seemed unnatural, as though the darkness itself were attempting to crush the vessel. Lights flickered and dimmed, leaving only the emergency systems glowing faintly. Lyra froze, eyes wide with terror. "It's coming closer," she whispered. I can feel it inside the walls." Elias crouched beside her, wrapping his arms around her small frame. "Listen to me," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his own heart. "You are not alone. I'm here, my heartbeat. It will keep you safe. Breathe with me, feel it. The darkness cannot reach us when we are together." Her hands pressed harder against his chest, and for a moment the shadows recoiled, retreating from the pressure of life and warmth. Crew members who watched from a distance noticed the change, a faint glow that seemed to emanate from Elias, a protective aura that pushed the night back. Malvek adjusted his instruments rapidly, his eyes wide. "It's creating a field," he muttered. "Somehow, someway, the human presence is forming a protective influence, and the child amplifies it." Cyril's sharp eyes narrowed. "It is more than influence, it is resistance. The night cannot adapt to it. Its attack weakens where they are present. The question is, how long can they hold it?" In the corridors, the night was relentless. Shadows coiled around corners, seeping through walls, filling the vents and ducts with an unnatural chill. Crew members ran for safety, but Elias and Lyra remained calm, moving steadily toward the heart of the ship. "Where are we going?" Lyra asked, her small voice trembling. "To the observation deck," Elias said. "From there we can see the night and we can guide the crew safely. We have to face it, not hide from it." She nodded, her trust unwavering despite her fear. Together they moved through the corridors, their combined presence pushing back the darkness in small increments. Where Elias walked, the shadows receded, coiling back like smoke in the wind. Lyra's empathic abilities strengthened the effect, her connection to him amplifying the rhythm of his heartbeat, the essence of life they both carried. As they reached the observation deck, the view beyond the reinforced glass was breathtaking and terrifying. The night stretched across space like an endless black sea, twisting and writhing, devouring light and matter alike. Planets and stars within its reach were shrouded in a heavy, suffocating darkness. The crew gasped, many frozen in awe and fear. Elias took a deep breath and held Lyra's hand. "We have to keep going," he said. "We can't stop. The night is testing us." Suddenly, a massive shadow surged toward the ship. Instruments screamed warnings, and the hull groaned as if under immense pressure. Crew members screamed, some even fainted, but Elias held firm, placing his hand over Lyra's. "Stay with me," he said. "Feel my heartbeat. We are stronger than fear." The night struck at the ship like a tidal wave, tendrils pressing against the hull, slipping into every corner. Yet where Elias and Lyra stood, the darkness could not penetrate. The glowing aura that surrounded them expanded slightly, forcing back the invasive shadows. Crew members watched in stunned silence as the impossible unfolded. A human and a small alien child, unarmed, ordinary in every measurable way, holding back a force that had terrified entire civilizations. Malvek whispered, almost in disbelief, "It is not fighting it. It is resisting it. The human heart, life itself, it is a weapon the night cannot touch." Cyril's sharp gaze never left Elias. "And the child, her presence strengthens it. The two together are a shield, a living shield." The night recoiled slightly as though frustrated by the resistance. It shifted, twisting and writhing, probing for weaknesses. Shadows seeped through vents, through cracks, but each time they approached, the faint pulse of Elias' heartbeat repelled them. Lyra, standing beside him, whispered softly, her voice steady now, "It cannot reach us. Your heartbeat, it keeps me safe." Elias nodded, speaking to her gently. "We face it together. We are not afraid, not truly. That is why it cannot win." Hours passed. The ship shook under repeated strikes from the darkness, but Elias and Lyra moved steadily through the corridors, guiding frightened crew members, comforting the weak, and maintaining their calm. Slowly, the night's tendrils withdrew, unable to penetrate the warmth and courage they radiated. The Empire's officers watched in stunned silence. This human, this ordinary being, had done what no fleet, no weapon, and no scientific instrument could. He had faced a cosmic entity with nothing but his courage, empathy, and life itself, and he had prevailed. Lyra pressed her face against Elias' chest once more, whispering, "I trust you. I always will. Your heartbeat, it keeps the night away." Elias smiled softly, placing his hand on her small shoulder. "And I will stay with you no matter what comes. We face it together." For the first time since the ship entered the dark region, there was a sense of calm. The night had not retreated entirely, but it had paused, observing the human and the small alien girl. It was testing them, probing their courage, measuring their strength in a way no one could have predicted. Crew members began to whisper among themselves. "How can a human do this?" they asked quietly. "How can a child survive?" The answer was simple yet profound. It was not about strength, weapons, or technology. It was about life, courage, and hope. It was about the refusal to surrender, even when faced with a darkness that had existed for eons. It was about the bond between two beings who chose to stand together, despite fear, despite danger, despite the unknown. In the observation deck, Elias and Lyra stood side by side, gazing out at the swirling blackness. The stars beyond the night were faint, distant, but they shone nonetheless. The night shifted again, probing for weakness, but it could find none. Elias' heartbeat, steady and unwavering, resonated with Lyra's empathic energy, forming a shield of life and warmth. Dr. Malvek shook his head, unable to fully comprehend what he was witnessing. This is beyond science," he whispered. "It is impossible." Cyril's sharp eyes softened as he observed the human. "It is not impossible," he said quietly. "It is humanity, something the Empire never measured, something we ignored, thinking it weak, ordinary, but it is stronger than any machine, any weapon, any fleet. It is the essence of life itself." As the hours turned into days, the night's assaults became less violent, less frequent. It seemed to understand at last that this human and the small alien girl were not to be touched, that their courage and life force were beyond its reach. Crew members began to find courage in themselves, inspired by the calm and bravery of Elias and Lyra. Where they walked, hope followed. Where they stood, fear faltered. And in the quiet moments, Lyra would press her ear against Elias' chest, whispering softly, "Your heartbeat, it keeps the night away." Elias would smile, placing his hand gently over hers. "And I will never stop," he said. "Together we are stronger than any darkness." The Empire's officers could only watch, awed and silent, as a human and a small empathic alien girl reshaped the understanding of power, courage, and life itself. They realized, finally, that sometimes the greatest weapons are not machines or fleets, but the quiet strength of a heart that refuses to give in to fear. The night, ancient and relentless, pulsed in the darkness, but it recoiled where they stood. It could not conquer what it did not understand. It could not touch what chose to shine even in the deepest void. And for the first time in its long existence, it paused, uncertain, wary, and defeated, at least for now. The ship had entered a sector where darkness lay thick like a living ocean, swallowing the weak light of distant stars. The night, sensing the growing strength of Elias and Lyra's bond, had become more aggressive, its tendrils striking at the ship with calculated force. Every creak of the hull and flicker of the lights carried an ominous weight, and the crew moved through corridors with cautious steps, hearts heavy with fear. Elias held Lyra close, their hands entwined as they navigated the central hold. Lyra's violet eyes darted to every shadow, every corner, sensing movement where humans could not. Her empathic abilities flared with tension, picking up the collective fear of the crew, the subtle panic in their hearts. The night fed on these emotions, and its attacks grew sharper, faster, more unpredictable. "Stay close to me," Elias whispered, his voice calm but firm. "Don't let the fear take you. We've faced it before, and we can face it again." Lyra pressed against him, small arms gripping his torso. "I can feel it. It is stronger now. It wants to break us. It wants to make us run, to make us afraid." Elias shook his head. "It won't, not if we stay together, not if we remember what we are protecting and why." In the control room, Dr. Malvek monitored the readings with growing concern. "It's coordinating its attacks," he said, pointing at the fluctuating energy spikes on the screen. "It is not random anymore. The night knows we are trying to protect the child. It is testing limits, probing for weaknesses. If it succeeds, the ship and everyone on board will be consumed." Cyril's sharp eyes followed the projections of the shadows. "And yet it cannot penetrate where the human and the empath are present. That much is certain. Their combined presence forms a field the darkness cannot breach. The question is, for how long?" The night's tendrils struck suddenly, slamming against the ship with a force that rattled the hull. Alarms screamed, lights dimmed to emergency red, and several crew members fell to the floor, dazed and terrified. The vessel groaned under the pressure, shuddering violently as though it were alive and in pain. Elias and Lyra stood firm. He felt the pulse of fear around them, yet he did not falter. He focused on his heartbeat, letting its rhythm guide the child, anchor her, and shield those nearby. Lyra's empathic energy intertwined with his life force, creating an invisible barrier that the darkness could not cross. "Do you feel it?" Lyra whispered. "It is angry, it is trying harder than ever." "Yes," Elias said, "but it cannot touch us, not if we stay together. Not if we keep hope alive." The night lashed again, striking directly at the observation deck. Panels flickered, sparks flew, and shadows crawled along the walls like living fingers. Crew members screamed and stumbled, but Elias remained calm. He spoke softly to Lyra, telling her stories of courage from Earth, tales of humans who had faced impossible odds, stories of strangers who had helped one another in moments of despair. Each word, each rhythm strengthened their connection, fortified the invisible shield surrounding them. From the control room, Dr. Malvek shook his head in disbelief. "It is not just a shield," he muttered. "It is actively repelling the darkness. It is directing it. The human is controlling the night without knowing it, and the child, she amplifies it." Cyril nodded slowly, his expression grave. "Then we are witnessing something unprecedented, a living, breathing weapon that is not a weapon at all, life itself, courage, compassion. That is what the night cannot overcome." The night, ancient and relentless, pulsed again. This time it struck more violently, lashing through corridors, flooding the ship with a suffocating pressure. Crew members who had fled to safer zones found themselves surrounded, shadows curling around their legs, creeping along the walls. Panic surged like a tide. Elias tightened his grip on Lyra's hand. "Don't be afraid," he whispered. "Feel my heartbeat, let it guide you. Let it remind you that we are alive, and that we refuse to give in." She pressed closer, closing her eyes as she let the rhythm of his life fill her senses. The shadows recoiled where they stood, unable to penetrate the combined power of human courage and empathic energy. The night struck again, more forceful than before, yet the moment it approached Elias and Lyra, it faltered, retreating as if repelled by an invisible wall of light and warmth. Malvek and Cyril observed in silence. "We cannot underestimate them," Cyril said quietly. "If the night senses weakness, even for a moment it will destroy the ship. They must remain unbroken." The night seemed to understand, pausing in its assault. It had tested civilizations, planets, fleets, but it had never encountered beings like these. A human whose courage radiated in the simplest, most profound way, and a small, empathic alien whose trust and energy amplified that courage. It recoiled, uncertain how to strike, uncertain how to consume what it could not touch. Hours passed. The night's attacks grew less frequent, but more deliberate, as though it were conserving energy for a final strike. Crew members who had witnessed Elias' actions began to gather courage, moving with him through the corridors, helping frightened colleagues and assisting in stabilizing the ship. Hope spread like fire through the vessel, and with it, the night's power weakened. Elias continued speaking to Lyra in quiet, steady tones, telling her stories of life, of ordinary humans performing extraordinary acts simply because they chose to care. He told her about family, friendship, small acts of bravery and kindness that had changed the course of events. Each story strengthened the shield, reinforcing their connection and diminishing the night's hold. Suddenly, a massive surge of darkness hit the observation deck. The hull shook violently and alarms screamed. Crew members screamed, some fainted, and shadows writhed along every surface. The night was striking with everything it had, testing the limits of Elias and Lyra's combined strength. Elias pressed himself closer to Lyra, placing his hands over hers. "We can do this," he said firmly. "We will not give in, not fear, not darkness, not anything." Lyra's eyes glimmered with determination. "I trust you," she said. "I know we can hold it together." The night struck again, more violent than ever, but the moment it approached, it faltered. The aura surrounding Elias and Lyra expanded, pushing back the darkness with renewed force. Crew members watched in awe as the impossible unfolded before them. A human and a small alien child, unarmed and ordinary in every measurable way, holding back a cosmic force that had terrified civilizations for millennia. Malvek whispered almost in disbelief, "It is not just resistance, it is defiance. The night cannot conquer what refuses to surrender." Cyril's expression softened. "And the child, her presence strengthens it. Together they are an unbreakable force. Not a weapon, not a fleet, life itself, courage itself." The night recoiled, retreating slightly, but it did not leave entirely. It seemed to gather strength, waiting, calculating, preparing for a final, decisive strike. Ilias and Lyra knew that the battle was far from over, but they also knew something profound. Together they were stronger than fear, stronger than despair, and stronger than the darkness itself. Through the chaos, Ilias' voice remained calm, steady, unwavering. "We face it together," he said. "No darkness can touch us if we hold on to hope, if we stand together. I am here, Lyra. We will not give up." Lyra pressed her small hands against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "It cannot touch us," she whispered. "Not while we are together." The crew, inspired by the human and the small, empathic alien girl, found courage they never thought they possessed. They moved through the ship with purpose, aiding one another, keeping calm, and holding on to hope. The night, for the first time in centuries, found itself opposed not by weapons or fleets, but by life, courage, and the simple refusal to surrender to fear. The darkness pulsed once more, a vast, endless wave, but it faltered at the edges where Ilias and Lyra stood. Their combined presence radiated warmth, life, and hope, pushing back the shadow, forcing it to retreat. The ship shuddered one last time, then stabilized. Alarms fell silent, lights returned to normal, and the corridors were calm, though tense. Ilias held Lyra close, breathing slowly. "We've done it," he said softly. "For now, it is held back." Lyra nodded, resting her head against his chest. "Your heartbeat, it keeps the night away. I always knew it would." Malvek and Cyril watched in silence, understanding the truth in that simple statement. The Empire had been wrong to measure strength only in weapons, fleets, and conquest. Life itself, courage, empathy, and the simple act of refusing to surrender to fear were forces no darkness could overcome. For the first time, the crew understood that humans were not ordinary, and that Lyra, small and fragile as she seemed, was not powerless. Together, they had faced an ancient, relentless force and survived, not through violence or technology, but through the quiet, unyielding power of the human heart and the trust of an empathic child. And though the night still lingered in the distance, watching and waiting, Ilias and Lyra stood firm, ready to face whatever came next. The ship drifted through the dark expanse, but this time the atmosphere was different. The night, sensing that it could no longer easily break the human and the empathic alien child, pulsed in the void like a storm, immense and patient. It had endured countless civilizations, feasted on fear and despair for millennia, yet here it was, hesitant, held at bay by something so simple yet so powerful: courage, life, and the bond between two beings. Ilias stood in the observation deck, his eyes fixed on the black void outside the reinforced glass. Lyra clung to him, her small hands pressed against his chest, listening intently to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Each beat was a defiance against the ancient darkness, each pulse a promise that they would not surrender. "The night, it's stronger than anything I've ever seen," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "It knows we are here, it wants to destroy us." Ilias shook his head, calm but resolute. "Then we will show it why life matters. It doesn't understand courage, hope, or trust. That is our strength. That is why it cannot touch us." Outside, the night shifted, surging closer, tendrils of darkness stretching toward the ship, probing, testing, seeking a weakness. The crew watched in tense silence, hearts pounding. Weapons and shields had no effect. Nothing they had ever known could confront this force. Yet Ilias and Lyra's presence formed an invisible shield, repelling the darkness wherever they went. Dr. Malvek studied the instruments, disbelief etched on his face. It's impossible," he muttered. "The human and the child, they are not fighting it in the normal sense. They are resisting it, guiding it, holding it back with life itself." Cyril nodded slowly. "It is not just resistance. It is an example. The night has never faced beings who refuse to surrender, who shine in the dark simply by being alive. It recoils because it cannot consume what carries hope." The night pulsed again, more violently this time. The ship shook under its immense power, alarms blaring and lights flickering. Crew members screamed and scrambled, some frozen in fear. Shadows writhed along the walls, stretching, twisting, trying to find a way through. Yet each time they approached Ilias and Lyra, they recoiled, unable to penetrate the invisible barrier of life and courage. Ilias knelt, wrapping his arms around Lyra. "We face this together," he said firmly. "You and I, side by side, we will not give in, not to fear, not to darkness, not to anything." Lyra's violet eyes glimmered with trust. "I believe in you," she whispered, "and I believe in us. The night cannot touch us when we are together." Hours passed. The Knight's attacks continued, relentless but measured, as though it were testing every ounce of their resolve. Crew members, inspired by Ilias and Lyra, began to move with purpose, helping one another, keeping calm, and resisting the panic that had plagued them earlier. Every act of courage, every quiet reassurance, amplified the shield around Ilias and Lyra, weakening the Knight's power further. Ilias spoke softly to Lyra, recounting stories of humans who had faced impossible odds. Explorers who crossed oceans and deserts without knowing what lay ahead, families who protected one another at great cost, strangers who risked everything for kindness. Each story resonated through the ship, not just in Lyra's empathic perception, but across the crew, creating a shared strength. The Knight, sensing its attacks were failing, grew desperate. Its tendrils lashed violently, pressing against the hull, seeking any crack, any sign of fear or weakness. Crew members clung to one another, shielding their eyes from the shadows that twisted like living smoke. Yet Ilias and Lyra remained steadfast. His heartbeat, steady and unwavering, resonated through the corridors, a rhythm the Knight could not corrupt. Lyra's empathic energy intertwined with his, amplifying the pulse, forming a living barrier that even the most ancient darkness could not breach. From the control room, Malvek whispered, "It cannot endure this. It has never encountered such unity, such life, such courage. This human, this child, they are rewriting what we know about power." Cyril nodded, his sharp gaze fixed on Ilias. "It is not just power, it is humanity. They do not fight with weapons. They fight with hope, empathy, and courage. The Knight cannot survive against that." The final assault came suddenly, faster, and more violent than ever. The Knight surged toward the observation deck, pressing against the hull with a force that made the entire ship tremble. Panels cracked, lights failed, and shadows twisted into grotesque shapes, reaching for anything alive. Crew members screamed, falling to the floor, some unable to move from fear. Ilias pressed his hand to Lyra's chest, feeling her pulse align with his own. "We are stronger than it knows," he said softly, yet firmly. "We do not fear it, we do not surrender. Together we are unbreakable." The Knight struck the deck, a massive wave of darkness, curling, writhing, alive. But as it neared Ilias and Lyra, it faltered. His heartbeat resonated through the ship, amplified by Lyra's empathic energy, forming a radiant barrier that the darkness could not cross. Shadows recoiled, tendrils retreating, twisting in frustration. Crew members who had been paralyzed with fear began to move, inspired by the unwavering calm of Ilias and Lyra. They helped each other, stabilized the ship, and lent their voices to the quiet hum of life that radiated through the vessel. Each beat of hope, each whisper of courage strengthened the protective field. Ilias spoke to Lyra, his voice steady. "The Knight can see fear, but it cannot consume courage. It can feel despair, but it cannot touch hope. That is why we stand." Lyra pressed her forehead against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of life. "It cannot touch us, not while we are together." The Knight pulsed one last time, immense and threatening, yet it recoiled, hesitated, and finally began to retreat. The darkness dissipated slowly, the tendrils shrinking and vanishing like smoke in the wind. Light returned to the corridors, alarms fell silent, and the ship's systems stabilized. Ilias and Lyra remained standing, arms wrapped around each other, their bond unbroken, their courage absolute. Crew members approached cautiously, awe and relief on their faces. They had witnessed something extraordinary. The impossible had been achieved not through force or technology, but through the quiet, unyielding strength of life itself. Malvek and Cyril watched in stunned silence. "It is finished," Malvek said, his voice trembling. "The Knight, it has never been defeated like this before." Cyril nodded slowly, his sharp eyes softening as he looked at Ilias. "Not defeated in the sense of destruction," he said, "but overcome by courage, by hope, by life." The Empire, watching through distant communications and sensors, was silent. They had sent fleets, weapons, and fleets of warships, but nothing could have achieved what this human and the empathic child had done. Their silence was not fear, it was awe. They had witnessed the true power of humanity, a force beyond conquest, beyond weapons, beyond logic. Lyra hugged Ilias tightly. "We did it," she whispered. "Your heartbeat, it kept the Knight away, always." Ilias smiled, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "We did it together," he replied. "I will always stay with you. We face everything together." Word of the event spread slowly through the ship and eventually to the Empire. Humans were no longer seen as weak, insignificant, or incapable. They were recognized for what they truly were. Beings whose courage, empathy, and refusal to surrender could challenge even the most ancient and relentless forces in the universe. Lyra, small and fragile as she seemed, was hailed as a hero, and the bond between her and Ilias became a symbol of hope across the galaxy. In the quiet moments that followed, the crew would often watch Ilias and Lyra, marveling at how life itself had triumphed. The night still lingered in distant space, waiting, observing, but it had learned a lesson it had never known. There are forces it cannot touch, powers it cannot corrupt, and courage it cannot destroy. Ilias looked out at the stars, holding Lyra close. "We have shown them what it means to be alive," he said softly, "not through weapons, not through fleets, but through heart and hope." Lyra pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "And we will continue," she whispered. "Together always." The ship sailed on through the galaxy, the darkness held at bay, and the Empire, once proud and unyielding, learned that sometimes the greatest power is not force, but the simple courage to remain alive, to care, and to never surrender. In the end, the stars shone a little brighter, the shadows held no terror, and the universe witnessed a truth that would endure for generations. The human heart, steady and courageous, could push back even the oldest darkness. And the small alien girl, who had trusted in that heartbeat, would carry the memory of this victory forever, knowing that hope and life are the strongest forces in the universe. And as she whispered once more, her words carried across the silent ship, through corridors and decks, touching every soul present, every listener who dared to hope. "Your heartbeat, it keeps the night away." Ilias smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "And it always will." The galaxy, silent and watching, understood at last that life itself could never be defeated.